to welcome all of you to this first in a series of 5 regional forums on the thematic priorities in the Penn State Strategic Plan. And today's theme, as I think you know, is stewarding our planet's resources. I'm counting 80 or more people in this room here at Greater Allegheny alone, not to mention the many who are linked electronically through the university, which speaks to the significance of the strategic plan in this particular thematic area, and as a way to come together to voice a collective vision for Penn State University. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly acknowledge a couple of folks who are in the room. Roman Dahani in the way back was our point person for logistics here. He's standing right next to Chris of University Park, who has brought his technical assistance to the effort here too. Our campus staff, this wouldn't be as organized as it is right now if it weren't for all the staff from physical plant and elsewhere who have helped put this together for us. So thank you to them as well. And then all the folks from the Office of Planning and Assessment, there's a dozen or so folks from that office here. You're going to meet one very soon who have come together here from University Park to help guide us through this discussion. So thank you to all those folks. We have several board members here from this campus. If they would quickly rise and we can recognize our board members for the campus at Greater Allegheny. Thank you. Just a little bit of housekeeping, and then I'll introduce the next speaker. The exit is out this door and to your left, and then a quick turn to the left down the stairs. That's the primary emergency exit for this room. Secondary would be out the door and to the right. Okay, so 2 exits. The primary one through the door in the back, and then looping around, probably the way most of you came into the building to begin with. And then washrooms are just out the door to the right. Okay. I think our safety officer was here, Sergeant Pack, and he may be sort of coming in and out of the building, out of the room as we proceed. So, without further ado, I'd now like to introduce the Vice President of Planning and Assessment, Lawrence Kennedy Phillips.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see all the people here, and hello to everyone out there virtually as well. I'm here on behalf of Provost Jones to welcome all of you to this wonderful first strategic planning forum, and we're really very happy to see all the people and the engagement. I think one thing for me, I came on board in October of 2015, and the strategic plan was just being approved by the Board of Trustees that spring. And when I came on board, the plan was already in the process of being developed, and what I heard during that time was how important the engagement of the university community was in the development of that plan. And I think that's why, as we get into the process of implementing the plan, we want to continue that idea of making sure that all members of the university community are actively engaged in the development and implementation of the university strategic plan. You know, an important part of the work that you're going to hear today came from members of our steering committee, and some of the things they're going to talk to you about today are actually a result of the good work that you've already done. Many of the unit, college, and campus level plans had a very important role in helping us start to think about how do we implement the elements of our strategic plan. So a lot of this work that they're going to talk about today and start engaging you in a discussion with has been started by you, and you have already provided a lot of that foundation. One last thing I'd like to say is that this is not just an opportunity for us to speak to you, it's actually an opportunity for us to have a dialogue together. And one of the important aspects of these forums is just to see the faces. As you go back to your campuses, as you go back to your departments, you know that if you have ideas or thoughts or initiatives that you think can really help support this strategic element, these are some of the folks that you're going to want to contact and work with to see how we can help bring those elements to the university community and bring those ideas to the university community for further development and discussion. With that said, I am going to turn the microphone over to Pavel Patil, and she will lead us in our discussion. Thank you very much.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I am Pavel Patil, and I am from the Office of Planning and Assessment at University Park, and I will be serving as your moderator this afternoon. Today's discussion is going to be led by the Stewarding Our Planet's Natural Resources Steering Committee. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a few logistical things before we begin. Today's forum is going to be live streamed in addition to having our live audience. And for everyone who's watching right now, both live stream and in person, we're going to have the opportunity for you all to be asking questions throughout the forum. So for those of you who are watching remotely, you can either submit your questions via email to strategicplan@psu.edu, and we'll be following those questions in real time. Or you may submit them via Twitter using hashtag PSUPlan. For those who are joining us live in the room today, you should have received an index card. And if you do have a question, please write your question on the index card. And Rachel will come over and get your card if you raise your hand. If you do not have an index card and you would like one, please raise your hand now and Rachel will come over and bring you an index card. And for those of you who are watching remotely, we are going to be having a presentation during today's forum. The link to the presentation is on the same page on which you've accessed the live stream. So there is a link to the presentation that will be shared with us this afternoon. All right, let's get started. Let me introduce our panel. So the first member of our panel is Charles Patrick, who's visiting us from the Fayette campus, where he is Chancellor and Chief Academic Officer. He's also a member of the Stewarding Our Planet's Resources Strategic Plan Executive Committee. Tom Richard is a member of the Stewarding Our Planet's Natural Resources Executive Committee, and he's also a professor of agricultural and biological engineering, as well as director of the Institutes for Energy and the Environment at University Park. Laura Fowler is co-chair of our Stewarding Our Planet's Resources Strategic Plan Steering Committee, and she's the Assistant Director for Outreach and Engagement at the Institutes of Energy and the Environment. And in addition, she's a senior lecturer with Penn State Law. And lastly, Jeffrey Brownson is co-chair of our Stewarding Our Planet's Resources Strategic Plan Steering Committee. And he's also the Associate Professor of Energy and Mineral Engineering at University Park. Welcome to our panel.
So I think I get to lead off. I wanted to start out by just reminding us all that Penn State is a land-grant university. And what that means is that back well over 100 years ago, and actually in the depth of the Civil War, our United States government decided that they wanted to create an educational system that would be available to all people and that would teach people about the practical arts, particularly at the time a big emphasis on agriculture and the mechanical arts, which have turned into manufacturing and engineering and all kinds of other very practical fields. But also and in corollary all through that time, trying to understand how to manage our planet's resources effectively. So really this whole topic actually is part of Penn State's DNA. And we've been doing a really good job of it for over 100 years. For the last several decades, we've really made great strides in putting together interdisciplinary efforts to create some teams to take advantage of the research and the knowledge and the tremendous student energy that we have at all of our campuses to try to make sure that we do a really good job of finding safe, clean, affordable energy sources, of making sure that the water and the air that we breathe and drink is of high quality, and to make sure that the land that we live on and depend on for many of our resources, in fact for our entire economy, is taken care of well, both for this generation and for future generations. We've been doing a very good job with that, but we can do better. And a big part of the strategic planning process is to try to figure out how collectively we can take better advantages of all that knowledge and energy and enthusiasm that we have to better impact our communities, to turn that knowledge into action. So that's an overall frame for what I think we're trying to accomplish, and we have to get into the specifics to actually make that work. We've got a process here that Charles would describe that we're embarked on to start to make it down that path.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone. First, let me thank Dr. Egan and his staff and here at Greater Allegheny. Thank you for making us very comfortable and getting us moving along. I want to talk to you about process just for a moment and then turn this over to really get to the details. The process started with the development of the executive committees. The makeup of those were both at University Park and leadership at University Park as well as at the campuses. Those leaders and specialists like Tom that came together. We first met in August of 2016 at a leadership retreat to start the process of solidifying a vision for stewarding our planet's resources. We recruited specialists and as members of the steering committee, people like Lara and Jeffrey. And again, those were well represented by people from University Park and from the campuses. I understand some of our steering committee members would love to be with us today, but they're actually teaching classes, so they have a priority there, and I think that's a good one. The steering committee basically had its role was to develop initiatives related to targeted areas of opportunity, to establish specific goals and objectives, to establish action plans to get at those goals and objectives, to identify and track performance indicators, and then to ensure that the plan's foundation, the strategic plan's foundation, was woven throughout the proposed goals, initiatives, strategies, and metrics. And then finally, to facilitate public forums to engage the community in the plan's implementation, and that's why we're here today. Without further ado, I'll introduce Lara and Jeffrey as the co-chairs of the steering committee.
Great. Let's start. Both Jeffrey and I realized that we're more comfortable standing up, perhaps because we teach, so we're going to do that. We're going to tag team through this. As folks have introduced, I'm Lara Fowler, and this is Jeffrey Bronson. We're the co-chairs of Stewarding Our Planet's Resources Subcommittee. And we really do appreciate everybody's time in being here today, as well as being online. This has been an interesting process where the subcommittee was appointed, I think in August of this past year, and it started meeting in September with the deadline of trying to create draft set of ideas by January 2nd, and giving those to the Office of Planning and to the Provost. And so it's been a lot of behind the scenes work, and this is now very public. And so what we wanted to do actually is really present we've talked a little bit about who's here today. Let's see if I can, I'm working with the screen behind me. This did work earlier. Go ahead and do next slide for me. Sorry, I'm going to have to make you guys run that. Or Jeffrey, you can. What I wanted to do was introduce our subcommittee, and there will be a slide that shows this. Again, we're the co-chairs, but also on the committee were Monty Alger, who's with the Institute for Natural Gas Research, Bill Burgos, who's with Civil and Environmental Engineering, Andy Cole, Associate Professor of Landscape Architecture, Rob Cooper, who's with the Office of Physical Plant, Chris Duffy is Environmental Engineering, Lisa Emili is with Physical Geography and Environmental Studies out of Altoona, Greg Jenkins is Meteorology, Jonathan Lynch is Plant Nutrition, Cassandra Miller Butterworth is with Penn State Beaver and a professor of biology. Jim Shortle, agriculture and environmental economics. Pam Silver, professor of biology and Penn State Barron. Erica Smithwick, geography. Denise Wardrop, who's the head of the Sustainability Institute. So you can see actually a fair range of people. And partly what we did, if you can go to the next slide, please, was to really compile this. Padma mentioned these earlier. If you are looking for feedback and have questions, comments, ideas, here's how to do this. We'll bring this slide up a couple times to make this very easy for you. So again, this is really taking this and going public with it. What we did, and a piece of this, Lance mentioned this, is part of an overall set of discussions. And if you look on the left, there are core fundamental principles that the university is trying to meet. Access to education, engaging students, fostering a diverse world, global engagement, economic development, and sustainable future. There are 5 pillars, and each of the 5 forums, this being the first, will cover each of these 5. So we're in orange here with stewarding our planet's resources. There's also transforming education, enhancing health, advancing the arts and humanities, and driving digital innovation. So this is a complex slide with a lot of moving pieces, but really if you have feedback, and again, ideas or initiatives, thoughts that we should know about, we're really looking to incorporate them. The strategic plan itself says Penn State will be a leader in creating comprehensive solutions to mitigate the dangers of climate change and address the challenges of providing safe and abundant water, clean and renewable energy sources, and plentiful and nutritious food. The charge given to us as a subcommittee was go make this happen. Okay, how would you like us to do that? Under there are some fundamental goals for implementation. How do we drive fundamental science relevant to critical problems? How do we develop technologies for innovation, improve our modeling capacity, engage our research infrastructure, and forge broad partnerships as we're doing this? So really our objectives were how do we do these kind of actionable initiatives that we can start to implement. Maybe they don't come to full fruition over this next 5 years, but we can get started. So when we look up sometime in the future, we can say, yeah, that was tied to our strategic plan and it really did make a difference. How do we ensure, and we were particularly driving on that, what was on your left side of the screen, sustainable future, jobs, economic development. And as Tom referenced, how do we really make sure that we live up to our charge as a land-grant institution? What does a 21st century land-grant institution actually look like? Spent a lot of time through the subcommittee process really talking about that. We have a picture of what our process looked like. We actually did go back and review all of the unit plans and all the Commonwealth campus plans to look for ideas related to sustainability or anything else. That's the far left slide. We generated a number of our own ideas, and then we scribbled on a lot of whiteboards to try and figure out how to put it all together. Normally, probably don't show the behind-the-scenes work, but it was a lot of saying, what do these ideas look like, and how do we actually bring them together? We were also talking about challenges. You know, what does a 21st century land-grant institution look like? How do we deal with this at multiple levels and stages? How do we respect people where they are, the places that they're in, resources, and really dealing with a complex interconnected system of food, energy, water. How do we deal with growing populations, climate change, and employment needs, and really make sure, again, we're dealing with those. So I'm going to hand this to Jeffrey for just a second, because we were struggling with sort of the visual aid. I have a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old, and they were quite thrilled when I brought this home, like, you brought a toy. So this is called a Hoberman sphere. And it's basically the idea that it can be small, it can also be really big. And so what we were thinking about in terms of sort of the visual is the connection between local to global and global back to local. And how do we work everywhere in between? Using the vast reach of Penn State students, alumni, its network, its partners, everywhere we go. And so, again, looking at the opportunities of scale. We have people who are talking about the microbiome. What's going on inside your gut? And how does that affect your health? To how do I change how corn is grown so that the roots are deeper and more drought tolerant, and everything in between. So what our core principles, and Jeffrey's going to walk through them, are a number of things that we really focused on to drive this discussion. Like I said, we're going to tag team. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So thank you very much. Welcome everyone again. So when you have to imagine we're part of a very diverse committee coming from multiple campuses and really seeing the perspective of Planet's resources as more than just, say, the natural resources, that we're actually talking about people coupled with these resources associated with our planet. And as we got into those discussions and as we expanded the framework to really fit the multiple perspectives that we were bringing to the table, we decided that we really needed to form some core principles that would guide and potentially constrain a very large topic area. So we have these core principles, 8 core principles that I'm going to progress through and give a little bit of background behind. So the first core principle was to build on our own portfolio. Penn State has an extensive portfolio of research, of interdisciplinary leadership, of skills tied to extension, tied to our education system. And we really want to leverage those existing strengths across all of our different units, across all of our campuses. So that was fundamental to our process as we move forward. Core principle number 2 is engagement. And it really is about the idea that we are a part of a process where we are engaging you, where we are engaging our own stakeholders that are at each of our units, and that we're fundamentally seeing food, energy, and water as being enabled, with people. That people are a core part of this process. and that we really need to start people first to lead to new solutions. The third core principle of Penn State is really just, another reason why we're here inside of this wonderful campus at Greater Allegheny is that Penn State has a distributed network of compelling and powerful campuses, each with their own identity. And those unique identities and those communities that are a part of those campuses is also going to be a part of our strength and our opportunity inside of the state of Pennsylvania to move forward. Again, when we look at this, we see the multiple campuses within our steering committee as the asset, as the strength that we can build from. The core principle number 4 goes out to that, let's expand from the localized Commonwealth perspective and the community surrounding each campus to a global connectivity. Well, Penn State has an enormous alumni base, correct? And that alumni base also expands internationally. And so as we have global reach through our alumni, as we have global reach through our global programs, through engagement networks across the world, we need to use that. We need to leverage that. So we have a local language and expanding again back out to a global framework. Core principle number 5 is tied to sustainability, but it's that sustainability involves simultaneous integration of health, of happiness, environmental quality, the areas that are supporting us right here, and our economic well-being moving forward into the future for now and for current generations. Core principle number 6, again, just setting up the foundation for how we're moving forward in our steering committee process. 6 is understanding that, is understanding climate change, is understanding that the changing climate we have is going to be a big challenge for that intersection, that nexus of food, energy, and water. We're already seeing it right now across the nation and here inside of Pennsylvania. We need to understand how to develop and sustain and build resilient communities, resilient infrastructure. Core principle number 7 is getting to the idea that these problems are coupled together. There are a lot of things that are tying these problems together. They are multidimensional. They call for us to get out of silos, to get out of our areas where we feel comfortable and start communicating across those uncomfortable zones, but also to build from what we think of ourselves maybe in the university as tied to the research and education systems, but also going out and thinking about how now research is tied directly to communities. And this quote came from a new framing of basically a concept called transdisciplinary research, but it's basically saying like many of our research questions now are inherently no longer emerge from science, society, governments, from science alone, but interactions with civil society, with governments, and with stakeholders. So that engagement process really couples well with what we've been doing for the steering committee and where we'd like to go for the stewarding our planet's resources. Last of all, our core principle number 8 is essentially thinking about healthy people, and that healthy people are tied to healthy environments. They're tied to healthy communities. And so again, you're seeing this scaling from the individual to the community, to the global frameworks. And our challenge and potentially our future opportunity is understanding how we scale back and forth in that framework. And it becomes a really exciting opportunity for all of us. Now, why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this in part to identify what is a 21st century land-grant university. And that is a really compelling motivation. But additionally, we're also identifying how do we align ourselves so that if we are trying to develop funds, if we are trying to direct ourselves pointedly towards grants, if we are trying to enable our students and our community members and the economic areas surrounding us to do more with what they have, to go further, then what we need is we need to think about this planning as for strategic plans and the initiatives associated with it as being part of development campaigns, as being part of a linked financial system and funding ecosystem we've heard before in our own discussions, where we can make money go further. And with that, we will talk about some of our initiatives.
Yeah, I'm going to take the clicker. Let me just switch places so they can also see. One of the things that we've been talking about is sort of, okay, great, we have general principles, we're trying to figure out how to tie this to development, to fundraising, and again, talking with the provost, he said, I want initiatives that I can start to see implemented. So my way of putting it, we have sort of 3 big batches of initiatives. When I've just been quickly talking with people about it, sort of said, we've got 3 big buckets that we're really thinking about, and each of those has parts. So the first one, and we're gonna tag team back and forth on this, but we've dubbed PA 2050. And the second one is Research Reimagined. The third is sort of Outreach and Impact. Again, we'll go through each of those a little bit more. On the PA 2050, we're really trying to say, you know what, we could just go along, and in a handful of years, we'll look up and it'll be 2050, and the state will be what it will be. Or we could really start to think about this. What might it look like, but more, what do we want it to look like? And what can Penn State, with its network of Commonwealth campuses and network of campuses and reach of students in every community across this state, what can we do to help shape that vision? We have a whole bunch of questions we came up with. How do we address our energy needs? How do we address our water needs, our food, agriculture, our growing and changing populations? Jeffrey mentioned healthy and resilient communities. What do those look like? How do we ensure resilient, secure, and sustainable built environments and infrastructure where we live, where we work, where we travel? How do we address the climate change? How do we address adequate security of food, energy, and water? And also, very important, how do we address diverse workforce needs and meet people where they are? And so what happened actually in Louisiana post-Katrina, you all have heard of a small hurricane called Katrina, they actually went out and said, you know what, we don't know the answers for really rebuilding after this. And so they had what they dubbed Louisiana Speaks, a listening session across the state where they met with more than 27,000 stakeholders, more than 10,000 citizens alone, to go out and to really talk with people and say, how do we rebuild? What does this look like for the economy, for the ecology? How do we rebuild and protect our coastlines? And how do we meet people, again, where they are and meet the needs of those local communities? So Louisiana is working on implementing this actual plan right now. The official title is Louisiana Speaks Regional Plan, Vision and Strategies for Growth in South Louisiana. And so our thought was, can we do something similar within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania? Second initiative, so let me pause there. Jeffrey, anything on that?
Broader conversation. I mean, there was one thing that I will comment is that PA 2050 resonated. That wording and that we're looking forward really resonates and continues to resonate without constraining things so much that we're stuck. So there's a lot of opportunities in that we heard from our stakeholders.
Right. Anything else? Okay. I'm going to introduce this second set of initiatives, and then again, we're going to tag team through this. We're calling it Research Reimagined, but it was really trying to say, hey, we have really strong disciplinary strength in lots of different areas. How do we tie this together, and are there key areas we can really work with to meet this? So if you look at this in the lower left, build on and leverage existing strengths, partnerships, and projects. We're also thinking about, well, what happens if you don't? If you don't have enough water, you don't have enough food, you don't have enough energy, or it's not in the right place at the right time. How do we address that? We also thought about how do we learn by doing? We've had very robust discussions about the potential for using the Commonwealth Campus Network and the University Park system to practice. So the company Siemens, for example, has basically set out the goal of going greenhouse gas emission free by 2030. They don't know how to get there. But they figured that they would actually learn by doing. And so we've been talking about how do we deal with stormwater questions? How do we deal with the issues of food provision, food insecurity, food waste, same thing with water on our own campuses, thinking about the different size and scale of the campuses across the university. And then finally, how do we really pull people together out of their silos to work on these issues? Because none of them are that straightforward, and they all involve pretty complicated systems. First theme, and there's several sub-themes under this, is really resilience and security. You've heard us mention that term a couple different times in terms of resilient infrastructure, resilient people. But the idea that can we actually think about, for example, grid security. If you have an electrical grid and it goes down for a storm or for other reasons, how do you bring it back up and make sure that energy is provided for hospitals, that you go do your business and wastewater goes through the system and it is treated and doesn't just flow as raw sewage out into a river system. How do you ensure a resilient system that many of us take for granted? How many people here in this room, for example, actually know where their water comes from? Does anybody raise their hand? That's pretty good. That's awesome. In a typical crowd, probably not very many people do. Same thing with energy. But how do we start to build a system where people understand that and we have backups in it? Can we really address different impacts that run through the system? We've been in conversation, for example, with the borough of Muncie about creating a resilience center there where they're really looking not at the big cities, Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, but the smaller boroughs and townships, which may be dealing with very unique questions. Can we support work on human behavior, communication, and other type issues? Again, so a couple of targeted initiatives where we're starting to think, yeah, we could bring people together in these different areas. Next one relates to healthy food systems, food security, and sustainable agriculture. Much of Pennsylvania is a contributor to the Chesapeake Bay, and there's big issues with water quality in the Chesapeake Bay. But there's started to be a discussion called PA in the Balance, basically saying how do we ensure healthy farms as well as dealing with water quality questions. Pennsylvania, I think, is actually uniquely poised to deal with both of those questions for the many different watersheds that it belongs with. And so how do you really work with soil, for example, to ensure soil health and healthy water while protecting the community health? We have a Center for Pollinator Research that, again, is trying to bring people together to think about how you ensure that food is actually pollinated. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And then beyond that, it kind of goes back out to this global framing where we have some extensive work that's developed tied to basically a nonprofit framing called Plant Village, where we have diagnostic tools that are being deployed in Africa, that are being deployed to analyze plants for disease and to use a large information database to inform how our crops being managed. That development from Plant Village then expanded into a very large proposal to the MacArthur Foundation, and that was called The Exchange. The Exchange was basically looking at how would we grow what we know potentially as extension, but frame that inside of a larger space of West Africa for Burkina Faso, for Nigeria, for Cote d'Ivoire. As we learn by doing that, we are learning ways that we can also, again, think about Penn State as a 21st century land grant institution. How do we take that knowledge again and bring it back home so that things that we do globally come back locally and things that we do locally expand to the planet itself?
And something like Virtual Earth is to say, how do you take all these many systems and actually model it and work with it? And people, you may have heard the term big data. There's lots of information, but how do you integrate it so you know what's happening in the system, again, at that more global scale? So these are areas, again, where we're thinking about agriculture. We're looking at the reason other is up there with a question mark is that's all of you. What else do you have in mind that we also should be thinking about? Integrated water management. My background is as a water lawyer. Yes, there is such a thing. But this is an area where we think about drinking water, we think about wastewater, we think about stormwater, and the revolutionary idea that's kind of happening in this space is water is a resource, no matter what form it is in. How do we work with this? And so we're working, actually hiring now a director for a university-wide water institute. We'd like to pull our researchers together from across the university to really work in this space. There's a lot of overlap, of course, with energy and with agriculture. Dealing with the nexus between those, managing extremes. I'm working right now on a project related to flood insurance. Pennsylvania is one of the most flood-prone states in the country. How do you manage that and protect people and work with where people live to ensure that you can manage both flood and, by the way, drought? Pennsylvania was very close to losing its corn crop this past summer because of drought. How do you actually manage those systems? There's an interesting project at Penn State, and projects like this is called the African Diaspora Water Crisis Curriculum Project, but they're really trying to incorporate arts and the humanities into thinking about water supply in different areas. What can we do with art to help people understand these issues? Jeffrey?
Yes, and so beyond that, inside of our community of steering committee members, we have a lot of input from people who are thinking about the environment tied to very place-based scenarios. And in this case, the framing was as living landscapes. So we all each know that different parts of even Pennsylvania behave very differently for farming, for water retention, for the way that we interact with our surroundings. And because of that, that's actually driving us to think across disciplines about how landscapes, how changing and living landscapes interact and drive us to ask new questions tied to policy, new questions tied to design, and just the basic science of location-based research that can be very diverse and very challenging, but will draw upon social resources such as what we would call intergenerational resources, meaning that your grandparents, people who know the story of this place right here over generations will have something to communicate about how the landscape has been shaped, how the landscape might be changing, where it might be going, and it might contribute to those discussions of PA 2050 and the like, and we see overlap in those. This is also creating the foundation to think about landscapes. Everybody connects with landscapes. You know your place where you live, especially if you've lived there for a couple of generations. Because you know your place, and because of that, we can use landscapes as a tool to create a sustainability extension toolbox where we can voice the ideas of sustainability, but connect it to something tangible, something that you can relate to, such as your local landscape. The landscapes actually connect very closely with the next thematic topic, which is looking at solar energy writ large. Okay, so full disclosure, I am a solar researcher, a solar scientist. I teach engineers in solar energy project development. Pennsylvania, despite clouds, despite rain, has a very rich solar resource. Otherwise, we wouldn't have agriculture. This would not be Penn's Woods, right? So because of this, it actually has led to a growth of research surrounding the diversity of ways that the sun can be converted into different goods and services that we framed as solar ecology. So solar does not necessarily need to mean the photovoltaics on somebody's rooftop, but also means the way that we think about growing grapes, the way that we think about our crops, the way that we design our building systems to have lower energy and more sustainable infrastructure. Penn State Solar is a potential new way of looking at things because of the decreasing costs of the technology that is photovoltaics. This is the conversion of sunlight directly to electricity. Those costs are going down so fast that Penn State is looking at strategic ways of implementing and integrating this renewable energy source into our local campuses, which can then again be a teachable message and can be an engagement platform for looking at engaging our communities for jobs and new opportunities. Okay, and so let's think about that in terms of the framing of energy. Energy here was first as solar, but we know in Pennsylvania that energy is throughout the history of our state. We are an energy-rich state, It has been oil and coal and natural gas and nuclear energy and now solar energy and the wind power that's been developing. We know energy, and because of that portfolio of energy, we want to embrace that platform, which is why there is this new growing message of Penn State tied to the Energy University. And it is really up to us to be thinking about how we engage in that platform as the Energy University as a greater platform for a whole portfolio of options, a whole portfolio of opportunities to learn by doing and to potentially grow into job training and to grow into workforce development inside and across our communities in Pennsylvania.
The last thing that we'll touch on in this is really thinking about health and the environment. You've heard us touch on this a couple different times, but really how does water, food, air, the land around us, our health, our schools, our buildings, where we work affect us. We are actually, hopefully soon, tomorrow, putting out a seed grant proposal on health and the environment that is actually a consortium of 6 or 7 different institutes in the College of Medicine from across the campus to try and grow research in this area. So one potential idea. We're also focused in different areas, be it water, air, energy, et cetera. And so really looking to grow this, where you may have funding sources from, for example, the National Institute of Health, aren't necessarily coupled with what other folks are working on in terms of research in the food, energy, water sphere. How do we bring those closer together? And so this is something we've been having lots of discussions within the university about and trying to figure out how to leverage. So those are this is the second big bucket of topics. Our third sort of bucket, if you will, or an initiative, Jeffrey's going to touch on, but really deals with the human side of things.
Right. So, in as much as the first initiative was really looking at this state framework, the second initiative was looking at all of the different ways that the food, energy, water nexus starts interacting and forming new initiatives, new ideas for opportunities to research and to do education and to engage our communities. All of that work requires people, and it requires you as people, and in your communities specifically as people. So the idea of our third initiative was really building on human capacity, building our human capacity in each of our locations, in each of our campuses and the surrounding communities at Penn State. How do we think about the individual and how the individual you connects to your group, connects to your department, connects to your surrounding community or place where you are growing up or where you are living, and then grows that back into all of these different initiatives that we've been thinking about. How do we build capacity to have challenging conversations, right? There are a lot of interesting and yet very challenging topics to discuss tied to our planet's resources. We need to build capacity to be able to hold those conversations and build on them in a meaningful way. We need to think about, as Laura was talking about, building resource literacy, knowing where your water is coming from, where it is going, knowing where your energy is coming from, rather than just that outlet over there where I plug in my iPad. The idea that things come from places and go to places is a literacy aspect that we could do here in the university, that we could do K through 12, that we could do with our parents at home. And so it's a really great opportunity. And again, we keep on emphasizing that we are a distributed network of campuses. And so how do we use this to support the efforts at Commonwealth campuses? Each Commonwealth campus has a unique identity, and an identity that we actually should be embracing and building back to our different unified efforts as a university. The idea that we have students out there with a lot of passion. I see you in the audience already, right? We have people with a lot of passion who want to engage in the place that they live, and they want careers and they want jobs in that place, and they want economic stability moving forward. Part of our process of building human capacity is going beyond the classroom. Getting people out, getting people to engage in different communities, to see different frameworks, to see different perspectives of what we're doing. And so that becomes a major goal inside of Initiative 3. For building on human capacity, examples that we've been thinking about inside of the steering committee have been finding ways to integrate current faculty, current staff, and programs together. We already have seen, many of us in our steering committee have regularly had engagements across different colleges, across different campuses, across programs such as the Office of the Physical Plant with our own research. There are just these really rich opportunities happening. How do we get that to happen more? How do we develop that more? How do we do promotion of incentives that will allow and engage different communities, different units to work together and especially develop themselves as groups of diverse populations, to groups of different communities? How do we develop new hires, new strategic hires for new programs that are going to be coming forward in this planning process? We also want to think about programs that work on bringing in new theme areas, bringing in visiting scholars and developing local scholars to explore these new areas of development that we want to target. You'll see that we have opportunities, interest in developing funding opportunities for internships and exchange programs, as well as thinking about focusing on that K through 12 element so that we really do think about education across many generations.
We've also been thinking about leadership training. We talked about this some at lunch of what that looks like. How do we help students, faculty, communities learn to work and engage, as Jeffrey was saying, but do so in a systematic fashion? Is there a way to do that? So This is, again, how to give us feedback if you are not in the room. If you're in the room, there's lots of ways to do it. We're specifically looking for feedback on, what other ideas come to mind? Do you have comments? Do you have feedback? We've also been asking this question, we haven't presented on this, but how do we measure the outcome? We can look at output. That may be the number of journal articles, number of classes taught, but the outcome may be what actually happens. So if you have ideas on that, we are looking for that as well. So I'm going to put this back up and leave this here, but before we switch to asking all of you and engaging in a dialogue, I just want to see if Charles or Tom had more to add to what we just covered. We appreciate your patience as we went through a lot of material very quickly. Tom, Charles?
So thank you both. And this is really an exciting sort of overview of many of the things that are happening. And I'm sure, like myself, all of you probably learned about some things that are happening at Penn State that you didn't know about before. So I guess I'd like to just remind us all that, and you repeated this several times, that learning by doing, we know, is one of the best ways to learn, right? Get your hands into it, actually get challenged by the real world. It's also the best way to prepare for a career. And so what I would challenge the students and the instructors across all of our campuses to do is to look at these interesting themes and opportunities from PA 2020 to all the different possibilities that you just saw described, and think about how you can use those to expand your own educational experiences. Bring them into your classroom and take your classroom into your communities. And I think if we all can think about doing more of that, we're going to have the kind of impact that you've finished with, Laura.
When the executive committees were brought together, one of the first things we talked about was this event, or these events. It was critically important that we bring people that are specialists together to set a stage so that then the community, the Penn State community, could begin to have a conversation about how this is going to tie to the strategic plan, to the campaign, to us moving forward, near term, short term, and long term. So we're asking that. That's the most critical piece here today, is that you provide us input on what it is that you're thinking, the ways that Penn State should move forward, set in this stage.
So with that, we would actually turn to all of you, and there's plenty of you in the audience. Padma is going to help moderate this. We are taking notes. We'll do our best to respond, but again, comments, feedback, ideas, help us understand what you're thinking about. And Padma, how do you want to work with the audience versus the questions? We have a hand raised here.
So if you have questions and you're in the live audience, please write your questions on the index cards and raise your hand when you're done, and Rachel, who's in the back of the room, will collect your questions and they will be communicated to me up here, and I will post them. And we want a good combination of questions from the live audience as well as questions from our remote audience. So we're going to manage the questions that way. Greg, would you like the first question?
Sure.
All right. So this is an interesting question with respect to talking about students as well as faculty interest. Does the committee's work consist mainly of research goals, or is campus implementation and development part of the plan? So there was a good example here. It was, what about turning grass fields on campus into gardens for vegetables and other produce to make food production closer to students?
Sure, that's a great question. It's actually one that I think we've wrestled with quite a bit. The answer is all of the above. So a university has teaching, it has research, it has service, and it has outreach. It also has operations. So Rob Cooper went through his name pretty quickly, but Office of Physical Plant has been very engaged. And we've been trying to think about how do you actually experiment on our own campuses across the 24 of them to see what you can do to modify things. And so Office of Physical Plant at the highest level has been very interested and engaged with exactly that type of question. So we're thinking not only about research, but all of these other areas.
Yeah. I would basically add on top of that, in my own research, I tend to work with the Office of the Physical Plant quite extensively to really realize the desire for a group of staff who really be a part of change. And I think as long as we are acknowledging that this process that we're looking at is more than research alone, that research integrated with education, integrated with outreach and engagement and operational shifts, operational adaptations is integral. And the people who are a part of our staff community can be and should be a part of that voice and should be a part of that activity. And because we've built that into our steering committee, I think we've got some good directionality happening, and I'm really looking forward to the feedback.
Just very quickly, the campuses really emphasize, I've found it in the last few years I've been at Penn State, that undergraduate research is critically important for moving us forward, and it's many times applied research, and this is the type of stuff that we're talking about here, is engaging with the community, seeing what we can do to move things forward. So we think that the campuses are especially suited to the types of research and the types of engagement with the community that would work well here.
This is interesting. It's something that we were just talking about a little earlier today. Someone is asking, there's a tremendous amount of ecodiversity across the state, and getting students to different locales within the state might prove to be very beneficial from an educational and experiential standpoint. So how can we increase student access to different campuses? For example, how can a student who takes classes at University Park gain access to the strengths of the campus and faculty at Greater Allegheny with respect to our natural resources?
Sure. Well, I think we are a network, and we need to work on building those lines between the nodes of our network to make them stronger. And I think that's a great opportunity and a great example there. We are doing some of that, and one of the ideas that surfaced through this planning process is to think about a study not abroad but within Pennsylvania at different locations. So how can we actually set up mechanisms so our students can spend some time at different campuses or off-campus locations and communities and put some of their education into practice before they graduate? And I think there are a number of different possibilities, but it would probably be a lot easier to use our campuses as a core part of that network, and we should do that.
One of the programs that's actually starting up, this is 2017, I think this fall, is a program called Study Away Pittsburgh. And it's the idea that you can actually do a study away program in Pittsburgh for the semester. But we've also started to talk about, are there other ways to go visit a farm, go see where your food may come from, go visit where energy is produced, go take a look at these different aspects, all of which are in Pennsylvania, in the very classic Keystone State, so that we do understand that energy comes from someplace other than the plug in the wall, that our water is somewhere other than the tap, and the same thing with our food production, both where it comes in and where it goes to. We've been dreaming up, I'm not sure the students would put up with it, but as part of orientation, could we take them on tours of all of the different physical plants to really see the pieces? Our wish would be every Penn State student graduates knowing perfectly well where all of these resources come from, and are there ways within the state to do this? But how to actualize this, we're still dreaming a little bit, but trying to kick these ideas around a little bit more.
Right. We had someone ask a question about the chemicals in our water and food supplies, and how can we better understand what those are, and how can we reduce the presence of those types of things in our food and water?
So, great question, and we have a number of degree programs that are focused on understanding environmental science. In fact, we're ranked the #2 environmental science graduate program in the country, sandwiched between Stanford and Berkeley. So we've got really high quality programs going on. We've got students out in the field doing work. We're tied into citizen science to measure some of these things. But I actually think the second part of your question was the most important one, is how do we reduce those exposures? And in fact, one of the things that we're pioneering at Penn State is to try to teach our people that are going to go into the manufacturing industry, our chemists, our chemical engineers, our material scientists, some toxicology, so that they actually design the chemicals and materials for the next generation of manufacturing so that they're inherently safe. And that's something that has never been done before. Those disciplines have been separated. So I think it kind of reemphasizes the opportunity and the importance of building these interdisciplinary connections, making sure that the people are trained broadly so they understand the important other areas that will affect their work.
We have a question here that specifically addresses your presentation. Pennsylvania 2050 is the vision, and initiatives number 2 and number 3 are the knowledge and human capacity necessary to get there. All initiatives must therefore be equivalent in robustness and thought. Given the reality of resource constraints, how can we ensure that we are attended to all?
I think a large part of how you work with that is you start with the idea that you're going to embrace the idea that education and research and engagement are a part of the same vehicle, that you can't do one without the other. We have been part of a kind of a tradition where the three actually seem to function quite separately, and so they are in fact, three budgetary streams. The moving forward to think about how you are bringing together multiple people from different disciplines across their educational levels, be it from K through 12 to undergraduate to graduate to developing in the inside of the industry and training. That kind of bringing those things together as stakeholder engagement, as solving problems in local communities, and that in and of itself, going out into the field, going out into the communities, is a way to basically prime even fundamental research. That context-based research also can lead to fundamental research, and that research into those spaces leads to deeper and more integrative educational aspects, and that when you go into communities and you engage in communities and you start by listening instead of telling, the ideas can really move forward. And I honestly think the synergies of those, when executed correctly, when there are, say, incentives that are driving our faculty, our staff, our students to be a part of that, will actually start growing upon itself. And so we're talking about growing a new infrastructure of the way that we're solving problems and the way that we're addressing patterns.
One of the things that we really spend a lot of time about is actually talking about the fact that, again, we have 24 campuses that are already embedded and networked in their communities. They all have partners, they have relationships, they have existing dynamics within that local area. How do we use that as a starting point to have those conversations? How do we also partner with state and different state agencies, local agencies, nonprofits, or anybody else interested in these topics to bring it together and, again, grow it from the bottom up to address the needs of the local communities where all of us are? And so I think part of the question related to, well, some of these may be more well thought out than others. This is really an idea that we're tossing out there to see what the reaction is, and then trying to figure out how would we actually do that. But that's a longer set of conversations with people like Madeline Hayes, who's here in the audience, with each of the communities to figure out how you actually do that. You don't tend to spring a stakeholder engagement process from the top down and say, this is what we're going to do, and have people take it very well. So one of the things we're hoping to do here is to float this idea and then say, how do we actually implement this? But this has engendered a huge amount of discussion within our subcommittee and even within the university, even with support from our Office of Government Relations, who said, if you go that pathway, let us know. We're here to support you.
One point as well is, this process is operationalizing the strategic plan of bringing in initiatives that we might be able to do, again, near term, short term, and long term. But we're also uniquely set to tie this to the campaign. So part of what we're going to do is to bring in people who are very interested in the various pieces of this and perhaps have them be part of that through the campaign process.
Monday, therefore this question seems very appropriate. Given that methane emissions from animal agriculture is a significant contributor to climate change, has Penn State considered implementing initiatives such as Meatless Mondays or something like that?
So I happen to work with manure and cows occasionally. And so, yes, actually, the bovine species, both cattle and dairy cows, is responsible for between 4 and 8% of our greenhouse gas emissions in the United States, and similar numbers globally. So it's not a small fraction. It's not the dominant one either. But there are a lot of things that we can do in terms of our daily lifestyle to make a difference. And I guess I don't know of any consideration of that specific opportunity at the university or the cafeteria and the food services, but But I can say that we are thinking about having better tools so that people can actually understand what the various components of their own impacts are. And we just put together a really exciting one just a few weeks ago, got some national press, looking at food impacts in terms of nitrogen, which is another important element that affects the environment. And so providing the kinds of little apps that you might be able to put in your own lifestyle choices and understand what those environmental implications are is something I think we could do a lot more with, and we are wanting to do that.
Well, Friday, as everyone knows, was Inauguration Day, therefore we have a new president. And the political climate will change, probably. So are you taking climate change into consideration with some of your ideas and initiatives? And what do you think the impact of a different political administration will be?
I'll start. So we are taking it into consideration. We have some of the best climate scientists in the world. In fact, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which has got thousands of scientists worldwide, but has the largest contingent of that in the Nobel Prize winning third assessment, I think it was from Penn State. So we've got tremendous strength in that area, and we understand climate. And yes, there's some uncertainty about various components of it, but the dominant factors are things that we actually as civilization can change. So we're working very hard to do that. But it's not just about reducing the emissions, it's also about figuring out how to build resilience into our systems. And you saw that repeated several times in these themes, that there are things that right now are baked in terms of climate changes. Some of them we're seeing already in terms of increased flood frequency, in terms of increased drought. Laura mentioned both of those. And so we need to help all of our people that are working, trying to make productive living on the land, understand that and design for it and design more resilient systems. It's a core part of what we're trying to accomplish with this program.
And I wanted to just add in that I'll go back to the core message of stewarding our planet's resources, which says Penn State will be a leader in creating comprehensive solutions to mitigate the dangers of climate change and address the challenges of providing safe and abundant water, clean and renewable energy sources, and plentiful and nutritious food.
One thing I would add to that is, for example, last year I was in Reading, Pennsylvania, and I was talking with folks there and just said, hey, have you had any strange weather? And they're like, oh yeah, let me tell you about this storm or that storm or all these things. We're seeing a lot of unpredictable right now. And again, that really affects, a farmer making a decision in the field as to, do I plant, do I not? And talking with folks in near the Harrisburg area, and they're saying, we're putting in a ton of irrigation because of the drought conditions that we saw this summer. That's our best management practice for dealing with these issues. As you do that, that starts to change how nutrients move through the system. It changes how much energy you're using. It changes how much water you may be drawing from a river system and what that does to fishing. You're seeing changes in weather and climate affecting hunting patterns, fish patterns. Goes back to the earlier question about contaminants in rivers. There's been quite a bit of study work being done on the Susquehanna. I would imagine that some of you have fished on the Susquehanna, and there's real impacts to those fisheries that are being exacerbated by the highs and lows in the system. How do we manage that at a local level while people are making decisions about infrastructure that needs to be upgraded and fixed? In addition to being a water lawyer, I've also worked as a facilitator in a lot of communities, and when people at the local community level can come together to say, what issues are we facing? Let's work through those, and let's come up with a plan that works for our community. It transcends political boundaries and allows people to actually feel like they're engaging, contributing, and belonging in their own community. We were driving over, and I was talking about a community I've worked in Washington State where that has happened. And the community is just so much stronger because they have worked through these very hard issues. Catastrophic flooding. In 2007, they had a 500-year flood that buried the interstate freeway for 5 days. They lost all the dairy cows in the entire area. That's not something you wish on any community, but the resilience that has come out of that community in response to dealing with those issues together has meant it's a much stronger community today than it was 10 years ago. And so that's where some of the vision for some of this goes, is that we don't know the answers. We want to work together to figure out what they may look like in context that makes sense for all of our local communities.
Specifically related to the extraction and use of fossil fuels, how will this issue be incorporated into the plan as far as additional research in this area?
So we have among the, well, I think arguably the leading fossil energy research team in the United States, and they've been investing a lot of effort for more than a decade in trying to make sure that all those fossil energy resources, coal and natural gas and oil, that we have in Pennsylvania are going to be usable in a clean fashion. And so we're going to continue that work, and we have to find funding to do it. We've been well supported by the Federal Department of Energy and other agencies as well, so that will continue. And we also are working with communities and business to try to make sure that the best science is actually used as we continue to use those sources. One piece of that is that we also have to think about carbon management in a different way than we have in the past, and we're investing a lot in building up expertise in carbon capture and carbon utilization and carbon storage, and we're making progress.
The other thing I would add is we actually have a number of researchers who are thinking about batteries and battery storage, which has been a challenge for the renewable side. The wind blows, how do you capture that, or the sun shines, and integrate that? So a lot of discussion not only on the energy sources and supply, but also the energy systems and storage. Lots of discussions about economics, also starting to get into more discussions about law and policy. So the law school just hired a brand new dean 3 weeks ago whose background is in energy, climate change, environmental justice, but really thinking about what does that look like? How do we help communities that may be looking at diversifying energy sources? What are the policies that allow you or make it difficult to do? So not only energy sources as a portfolio, but also the other parts of the energy system. And I think that's part of the energy university discussions that have been ongoing.
This is a question about perspective and thinking about ideas from different viewpoints. How are the components of these initiatives incorporating the views of Pennsylvania industry? So sometimes things look different based on whether you're a business owner versus whether you're a student or a homeowner or a faculty member or a researcher. So how are you going to make sure that you incorporate all the different opinions on these issues?
Well, I can speak to that specifically within the energy domain. So one of the things that we initiated last year, and we're going to be repeating this May, is what we're calling Penn State Energy Days. And it's basically a day-and-a-half program to try to invite in stakeholders, largely businesses, but also government agencies and citizens, to talk about what their energy needs are, what their research and education needs are. One of the things that's come out of this, and you've heard a little bit today about the plug in the wall, is energy literacy is really important to businesses in this state, because they're concerned that people don't really understand the system that they're responsible for. But we're also working very hard to try to understand what the next generation of energy is, and also to come back to another theme, to use our campuses as living laboratories to test out new kinds of energy systems, which may work fine on the laboratory bench, but people are nervous about putting them into a full-scale urban setting. And so if we can use our campuses, several of which have their own power plants, as a place to test this out and to test out those networks and make sure that they're going to be clean, safe, reliable, and affordable, that's going to be tremendous. And we'd like to do the same thing with businesses involved with water and involved with waste and involved with all other kinds of resources.
Here also is where the campuses are really uniquely qualified to engage the community. In our area, for example, the people that are on the Economic Development Council, the people that are in the chambers, they're our neighbors. We know them. They've been to our home for dinner. These are people that are friends. So we can easily reach out and have that conversation when we just have to set the structure for that. So I think that's one of the great things about Penn State is its ability to be in those communities and to engage those communities in many different ways. So again, unique qualifications to do that across the system.
Related to this is legislative engagement part of the initiatives. And will there be an effort to ensure that whatever the research reveals will be followed by necessary or recommended changes in laws?
Yeah, let me take that question. there's been quite a bit of discussion within the university about how do we really actually work on the policy side at the local, state, national, international levels. And so I think actually Penn State now has 2 law schools, Penn State Dickinson near Harrisburg, as well as Penn State Law at the University Park campus. And both of the law schools, I think, have really been trying to say, how do we have our own challenges of helping our law students better understand what work they do and how to integrate that. And so within the university as a whole, particularly at University Park, there's been quite a bit of discussion about, do we set up a policy initiative, institute, center? We're struggling with the name a little bit, but how do we work on the healthcare side, on stewarding our planet's resources, food, energy, water? How do we better, Tom's phrase was translate data to science, or data to, what's the phrase?
Knowledge to impact.
Thank you. So that we're not just working with streams of numbers, but that we can actually be making decisions. I think the other opportunity that we've really realized is, hey, we have all these great folks who are working with bio and behavioral health. You know, someone's decision on sleep or exercise, how can we translate that into actual on-the-ground changes with these other areas? How do we bridge our physical science with our social science and behavior change even as we're thinking about these policy issues? So I would say this is an open area that we're actively exploring and looking for feedback. We've been in very regular conversation again with our Office of Government Relations. They know very well that these discussions are going on and are looking to support how they can do that. So further on the policy side?
Well, just that I mean, this is an area where I think all of us can play a bigger role. And I mean, I spent Friday in Harrisburg with a couple of secretaries of 2 of our state agencies and a lot of their staff talking about some things that we're doing related to the Chesapeake Bay water quality opportunities and also economic development opportunities relating to renewable energy. So they're eager to learn more from us, and to the extent that our students and instructors and can interact with their local government officials at across the state, I think we're going to even strengthen those relationships. So there's a part for all of us to play in this.
And I was just going to comment that the steering committee itself, in reviewing the different strategic plans, really did come across, in terms of the uniqueness of different campuses, came across Penn State Harrisburg, and they were very clearly voicing their anticipation of their strength to be able to interface with legislators as well.
We have a question that's a little bit more tied to Penn State. You all did a really good job in your presentation and your discussion talking about why this issue of stewarding our resources is so important. When we think about how to communicate this to our students and our communities, we're going to depend on our faculty quite a bit. Are there plans, or do you have any ideas on how to incentivize faculty to take this into consideration and do more, particularly if they're a little bit more peripherally involved in these issues? Are there ways to make it more integral to the tenure and promotion process? How will you, or how do you hope this work will become more important from an internal standpoint?
So my experience is that it already is important, that these kinds of activities have been recognized for a long time as being part of what we do at Penn State. We are a university that is engaged with our communities, that we're taking on complex challenges, and that kind of engagement is actually valued. But we can probably do more, and I think we're going to use the opportunities that Charles mentioned in terms of development and fundraising to create some more incentives. Because right now, quite frankly, it's hard. I mean, moving students across the state costs money, and not all of us have travel budgets. In fact, most of us don't. So we're trying to put together a package and maybe asking students to hitchhike or share rides or whatever. And so it's something where a little bit of financial resource could actually go a long way to help us be more effective. And I think we're also trying to create, and we've done this a number of opportunities through entrepreneurship programs where we've actually funded various campuses to put together some programs in this area. Oftentimes they've been related to energy and environmental experiences. So creating that extra little nudge of a pocket of resource that can help things happen, and we're very happy to help faculty across the university find those niches and take advantage of them.
A couple other opportunities I would say exist. One is thinking about the gen ed classes, and something we've been, again, within the committee sort of saying, are there opportunities there where everybody needs to take a class that meets those? I guess taught in a math class that was sustainability math, and it was really geared towards non-math majors, but to think about how these pieces fit together. The other thing that we've really been thinking about, again, are sort of exchange programs, or are there ways to develop funding streams? You know, can you create an endowment where it's up to the faculty to seek engagement, right? Where we're not telling from the top down what's going to happen, but creating opportunities or funding where someone can come in and promote something or create an identity or a project. So a couple years ago, the Sustainability Institute did what they called the Reinvention Fund. They raised $750,000, put it out to everybody, and all sorts of very creative things, both coursework and on-the-ground programs, came out of that from people taking the initiative and raising it up. So those are the types of initiatives. How to do this, as any feedback is welcome.
Thank you. This question specifically is mentioning the Fayette campus, but it probably applies to many other campuses as well. At Penn State Fayette, we have successfully educated students on how to reduce energy use in homes and within their dorm rooms and their classrooms. And we've noticed that students have been very successful in communicating this both to each other as well as to their family, friends, and neighbors. However, we've seen less success with faculty and staff in office energy use. How can we educate our Penn State populations to better pay attention to these issues, both at Fayette and other campuses?
Wow, okay. I think we do have a couple of our engineering professors that really strongly push this through their classes. They're good stewards. I think that we all probably could benefit from more conversations about energy efficiency within our offices, within our homes, across businesses. I do know that by serving on a committee that's related with the Office of Physical Plant, that the university is going through a large process right now of cutting energy efficiency or increasing energy efficiency and cutting those areas out where they're not. And we're a good example of that. We're moving some of our engineering program facilities into a building with a little bit of renovation, not a lot, and then actually taking down a building that is very, very old and very energy inefficient. And that's part of the trade-off that we're using. So again, I think we all could benefit from the conversation of how we might do that better. So turn your computers off on Friday afternoon.
I'd also just add in that we're basically talking about behavioral change. So many of the things that we're describing earlier are structural and things. If we think to our initiative, our third initiative to building our human capacity, we're really speaking to behavioral changes, and I think that does tie to incentives and other things that drive people to make change of their own volition.
Just one last thing. At lunch, we talked briefly about how do we get students engaged across the system. And it might be that we run a pilot of a leadership program where students might visit other campuses to do some things. It's getting those opinion leaders to be part of that bigger picture, I think, and that's where that might become part of what we're doing here, is teaching them about energy efficiency as part of that in one campus that really emphasizes that. That might be part of that leadership trip.
The other thing I would add is that we've started to drill into some what may seem like very detailed discussions, but for example, the Office of Physical Plant, if Rob Cooper wants to incorporate an energy efficiency mechanism, he has to meet a certain payback period. And so it's even getting to the level of saying, well, what if for some types of projects you had a renewable energy fund, again, that people could tap into in some way that maybe has a longer payback period that's not tied to the same fiscal policies. It's meant a little bit longer to stretch things out. So we have gone to that level of detail with parts of these conversations, but we're looking for ideas that maybe aren't big pot of money so much as structural changes to the system that creates a different kind of incentive or creates a different kind of opportunity. And again, we don't know what all those are. You may have it in your own sphere and say, oh, I need a little bit of help here. I need help thinking through that. Again, you're hearing it very often. We're looking for any or all ideas. And I think partly what we're going to do is take a whole bunch of stuff back to the subcommittee and wrestle with it and figure out how to repackage it. But the provost has been quite clear in saying, I want to see this strategic plan initiatives moving forward. Bring me ideas, take them to your executive committee, take it up to the oversight committee across the whole university, and let's get moving on this. So we've heard that message and trying to figure out how to take all of this, package it back up, and move it through the university.
And just building on that, we are hearing the message of this strategic planning process as a dynamic process. Okay, so yes, you have email and Twitter contacts to provide feedback. Should that feedback be in a couple of weeks from now? Okay, it's all right. Things take time to be thinking about it and then deliver it to us. Because we are allowing ourselves to have a dynamic process and a process that will continue to evolve, your voice still matters, 24 hours after this forum, weeks after this forum, a year after this forum. So really stay engaged and continue to think about how your voice can help to shape the greater process.
More questions?
Penn State has implemented a really thorough system for recycling and composting. However, it appears that students, when they arrive on the campuses as freshmen, are a little bit confused, or they don't quite understand all of the details and logistics involved. Is there a way that you think new students can better be informed on the recycling and composting process? Might there be a game or a requirement that they have to pass a certain test before accepting their grades at the end of the semester based on their knowledge of this?
The Sustainability Institute is actually working on developing basically a business council across the university to think about this and to test messages and to think about consistency. So, I mean, you find that garbage is different from where recycling is in different places on campus. So many of us has probably stood standing and kind of going, well, what am I supposed to do with this? But they're starting to really think, what systems do we have? How do we integrate that? And how do we train for that? And they have what are called green teams in many areas. And so, again, if you have thoughts or feedback, they're really retooling that and thinking about it. Charles or Tom or Jeffrey?
Just quickly, on the campuses, I think we mentioned something about that during our new student orientation, and then we all are also at this point at Fayette at least revamping our first year experience class to include some of those types of topics and talk a little bit about that for the campus and where they might find facilities to take care of that.
And just to add that I think this issue of how do we put these in practice in our own institutions is one that really is, it's all the way up to the top leadership of the university. And in fact, we're about to hire a chief sustainability officer for Penn State that'll be at the highest level. So, so this is an important part of what we're trying to accomplish.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left, so I want to give the panel an opportunity to offer some final thoughts and comments.
I think we've covered a lot of what we wanted to cover here today, which was, again, really kind of introducing a bit of the process, but also some of the ideas. But to reinforce, I think that this is an actual engagement process. If you have ideas, if you think there are specific people we should reach out to, our committee members, ourselves, we're really feeling our way through this. I think mentioned that this is the first of 5 forums. And so the other forums will be throughout the Commonwealth, but if you have issues you want to raise, you have ideas, these will all be live streamed, much like this is being live streamed. So you don't have to go to, let's see, Erie or Harrisburg or Berks or Brandywine, but you can watch it and engage with those. And so much like this one, hopefully material will be available. You can engage and raise your questions. There'll be information online. And opportunities, I think, for learning more about this.
Yep. And, and just building off of that, just think about how these different themes that we're thinking about, these pillars, the 5 pillars that were initially described, they are interlinking. They are, this stewarding our planet's resources itself has initiated so many cross discussions with different members of development, with different members of different planning groups, with other faculty members. It's a great starting point to be saying, I'm part of this committee. What do you think about it? And you know, it will incite lots of interesting discussions. The best part is that these are linking across each other, and again, that interlinking fashion is providing us with a mechanism to go further with the dollars that we're looking to develop, and go further with the human people, your communities. How do we make those communities go further? How do we get more enrichment and more resilience out of each of your communities without thinking that what we're doing is how to do more with less? So how do we actually create more, create richness, create job satisfaction, and create kind of wealth and happiness in your own communities?
So I wanted to just really thank everyone who has participated in this process today and going forward, the people in the room here with us at Greater Allegheny, but also all of you online. And thanks for the great set of questions that came in, and some of the answers that we hadn't heard before, and we'd love more answers to come in the near future as well as questions. But I also want to especially thank Laura and Jeffrey for their work, and their whole committee, who's put a tremendous amount of time and effort into this process to gather information to get us to the point we are right now, and is going to continue to do that as we move through this dynamic process. So thanks to you.
And my thanks as well, Laura and Jeffrey, and to everyone that's here with us. Andy, thank you so much for hosting us today. We appreciate Greater Allegheny doing that. And I would be remiss without mentioning 2 college deans, Dr. Easterling and Dr. Roush in Earth and Mineral Sciences and in Agricultural Sciences that co-chair the executive committee and have provided the leadership to set all of this up for us. So we want to thank them as well. And thank you all for being here today.
One final comment, if you do have any additional follow-up questions for the panel, please feel free to email strategicplan@psu.edu, and in the subject line, please place stewarding our natural resources. Thank you.